fantastic event we have here today. Thanks to all of you for coming. It's great to see so many faces in the room, and such a delight to be able to offer a forum on the life's work of Fred Bentz. As I mentioned in worship, he has been such an important part of this community, and then such a joy then for us to be able to see this other part of his life, an award-winning architect right here in our own community. So it is, and only Fred would have a title like this. Right? This is perfect. This is perfect. So it's such a great joy. And join me in welcoming and thanking Fred Bentz for presenting on his work today.
I'll test my voice. Can you hear me back there?
Yes.
The forum follows function. My daughter, Mary Ann, took this liberty.
Wordplay runs in the family.
And this is the old Metropolitan Building in Minneapolis. The firm I worked for at that time was Long and Thorship, and they were officing in the building. It's probably the most interesting space I've ever worked in, you know, with the massive stone walls and the open courtyard, the glass floors, the skylight. My space to work was right in that corner there. It was interesting, when visitors would come to the building, first of all, they were kind of scared about the rickety old cage elevators. They always kind of wonder if you were going to make it, but you'd get off the elevators and then they'd see this green glass floor and you'd kind of walk over to the side and you'd look at a narrow marble walkway. It's kind of I admit now the first time I was in, I was a little bit, had a little bit of trepidation myself. When I called my office to get whatever materials we had on these projects, this didn't come with the original exhibit. I think the office was probably kind of making a funny story about this. I show this because it has some historical value. A lot of people didn't know how sophisticated the banking system was at that time. We had 10-cent checks, no minimum deposit. You could use the checks as proof of payment for income tax. The list just went on and on. And also, I was at my board there, and I don't see the T-square, but I actually did have one there. This is the First Unitarian Church on Lowry Hill in Minneapolis. Keep dropping this. The original design was done by Professor at University, Harlan McClure, who later went on to Thompson University. And then the design was picked up by the chief designer in Thorship's office at that time, Hugh Griffith. I inherited the job for the working drawings, specifications, and the supervision. Nowadays we call them contract documents, and we don't call it supervision, we call it observation, for obvious legal reasons. This is my main contribution to the job, the large glass wall, which extended down to the level below, probably 50 feet high and about 40 feet wide. And at that time, there were no commercial sort of curtain wall systems available. So this is kind of hand designed by me and Crown Iron Works. And thankful to say it hasn't leaked. The old thermal pay units weren't properly sealed, so the glazing was replaced. Roger Clemens is there. Roger, when did we replace the?
About 12 years ago.
Okay. And still not leaking.
Correct. And your thoughts were wonderful, so don't in any way criticize.
It faces north, so that's no problem. And there's about a 40-foot drop between Mount Curve and Groveland Place, so the building had to accommodate that slope in sight. We did run into some problems. We ran into an old wine cellar on the site. There's been a very large mansion there. The contractor told me that they didn't find any wine, but I'm not sure. Next. This is the Elk River Steam Plant in Elk River, Minnesota. The main contractor was an engineering company, because it's largely an engineering job. So my responsibility was to design some kind of exterior that might be appropriate to be seen across the river to the main road to St. Cloud. So you see two large spaces. One is kind of glazing. Again, I reused to open up the offices and that kind of thing. The other wall was a series of precast concrete blocks. I think the precast were about 4x4. And into that we inserted about 3-inch diameter cylinders which penetrated the wall. So it was really an impressive sight as you went by the building at night. This was always one of Milo's favorite views, my partner. He used to go up to St. Cloud. That's the large glass wall, and that's the precast concrete wall.
Next.
Get the next one. This is the very first job that I had in the Long and Thorshope office that I took from beginning to end. It's a very small elementary school in Farmington, Minnesota. You'll note the kind of continuous glazing below the projecting canopy and the diffused glass block above. We never do that nowadays, but at that time we did a kind of a quick study to compare the cost of double glazing to the cost of energy. NSP was advertising energy at penny cheap at that time.
Yeah.
Some of you may remember that. Next. This is the Fine Arts Building at Mankato State College. There was a lower campus built into the hill which was not capable of expansion. They pretty much used all the space, so they were in the process of making a move to the upper campus on the top of the hill. At that time, there were several nondescript dormitories up there, and our challenge was to do this first major building on the upper level. Kind of interesting note, the outside stairways, very little attention paid to accessible buildings at that time. Even this was at the state level, of course, so, but it's kind of amazing. I think it's a very well organized plan. We have the two major spaces there, about a 550-seat auditorium and a recital hall here, separated with a double concrete block wall here. I think it's very well organized. We have the practice rooms, the studios, offices, and library, large band, and hall. And we did pay, at that time, although we didn't use Nicholson, we paid an acoustical consultant. We did slant the walls in both cases, and the floors were both slanted. So I think the acoustics came out pretty well. Nowadays, you'd almost be required to get an acoustic consultant to be sure that everything worked. We kind of went by guess and by gosh at that. And of course, the inevitable Mankato stone, when you do a building in Mankato, you have to use that. Next. This is a rather unusual church design at that time. It's the Methodist Church in Crystal, Minnesota. There were some site limitations. This was Rockford Road, this is the cross street. And the original building here was a 2-story building, classrooms and a worship space. And the parking area is right here. We made the decision not to turn the church this way. We put it diagonal to the main entrance. And if we'd done it the other way, we'd be right out of the street. This allowed us to do kind of a sheltered outdoor court there with a berm up to the road. And some of you may find this a little unusual, but we have a kind of L-shaped seating arrangement here, wrapping around, and the chancel is right there. You entered here. No rows are further than 10 rows from the chancel. It did mean that we got a kind of an unusual pie-shaped area right here, which the choir was perfectly happy with. I think the Methodist tradition, they don't insist on a balcony or that. So that was kind of unusual. We did, you'll see in the next photo that you hear kind of a glass link to separate our building from the old building. We were a little bit concerned about the brick match, and we didn't get a very good brick match. I think the brick that was used was went out of manufacture at that time. Kind of an interesting situation. This is the cross, which is at this corner. The cross actually sort of penetrates into the sanctuary with glass slots on either side. The cross doesn't match the grandeur of our cross. We were somewhat limited in budget, or we would have made it considerably larger. Next. This is the interior of the church. The pew is 10 feet away. There's the chancel area. And at the suggestion of one of the committee members, we made an L-shaped kind of chancel this way, so that the communicants were always facing toward the congregation rather than with their backs to the congregation. The light slot you hear is one of the vertical slots that is on the outside of the building, and we thought the crosses proportions are quite different from the normal. Their idea was that the wider cross was sort of spreading out to the community. And there was eventually an organ over here above this side aisle. Acoustically, again, we kind of did it ourselves. I think it wasn't a large seating, it was about 350 seats, so it didn't pose any particular problem. The ceiling over the chancel was raised up and sloped down toward the chancel, and we did have skylights in the ceiling of the chancel area. In retrospect, I wish we could have gotten more light into the building, but the problem was that the commercial street in front was a pizza parlor and Chinese laundry kind of thing. There just wasn't anything to see. We really were concerned about opening any major openings on that side. Okay, next. This is a subsidized rent housing project for the Minneapolis Housing and Redevelopment Authority. It's a fairly traditional high-rise tower, about 22 stories. We did an offset here to sort of downplay the length of the building, and that same offset is inside in the corridors. These are public spaces here. One comment, interesting. There was a very strong alderman named Sam Savanich in that board at that time. And like other architects, we got kind of swept away by using exposed concrete. You know, that was the time when I think in the Boston Harvard area they were calling it the new brutalism. Is that right, Roger?
Yes, indeed.
At any rate, Sam didn't like the concrete. He said that, you know, I went out and looked at somebody building the rain, and it looks all splotchy when it gets red. So I'm glad he prevailed. We actually changed it to brick. Thanks. This is a high school in my hometown. I was kind of concerned at the time at the interview because Wisconsin architects at that time were really charging less speed in Minnesota. I don't know why. I don't know why. But so we worked very hard. In the interview, I tried to show our experience with the Minneapolis system. I had previous experience for high schools in Fergus Falls and Richfield. So that hopefully did help us. I think there was a very good friend of my father's on the board. So, I think that may have helped us. It's kind of on a split level. This is an end location. It shows that the changes, like, it wasn't that much. But so we entered at this level from the front, and went up a half a level to classrooms here, and down a half a level to the science classrooms, lockers, that kind of thing. And the section is pretty hard to read, but that system allowed us to sort of subdue the taller buildings, the gymnasium, which usually sort of overwhelm most school buildings, and the theater. Okay, next.
Oh, Dad, do you want to point out Karen's office?
Huh?
Do you want to point out Karen's office?
Oh,
Yeah,
Sarah, what helped, that was right in that office.
my cousin. His niece.
One other thing, I think this wall, it doesn't show here, but it was sort of, it came out, slanted back, came out, front back, so it made a very nice arrangement for the classroom windows. At that time also, everybody was into flexible scheduling, which I never got too carried away about. But we had a consultant in our office who tried to convince me that we should use flexible scheduling. Well, I knew that flexible scheduling wasn't inclusive. It was the town of 2,500, 2,000 at the time. And so I made one concession. I said, we'll have some of the classrooms that are easily removable. But they never moved any of them. Next. These are two of the inside spaces. On the right, you see the sort of circular form for the auditorium, theater kind of space, what was coming into vogue now, the typical commons area. And on the left-hand side, that sort of serrated wall is the library. So we were complimented on that arrangement as being very effective. Matter of fact, I think, yeah, this was exhibited at the American Association of School Administrators, which always happens once a year in New Jersey, or did that. So the principal and I got a trip sponsored by the school board to go out and attend it. This is South High School, which has a much larger commons area, and you kind of see the same circular arrangement for the theater space. At the time, the Minneapolis board, in its wisdom, decided that they would hire a Texas firm, Collier, Rowland, and Scott, who were presumably very hot in the school buildings. And John, you may remember hearing. Do you remember hearing of them? At any rate, they were engaged to do the initial programming and the initial studies. And we took over, let's see, that was North High, South High, and Armitage School were involved in that program. Again, this case of all situation, the current building manager had worked with CRS in Dallas. He comes from Dallas, so he brought along his. One other thing occurs to me, there was a very strong American Indian community in that area at the time, so a lot of the graphics, stairwells, colors, I think made strong reference to that community. Is it still fairly strong?
Been in there years.
Next. How am I doing for time?
You're doing great.
All right.
Yeah, Dad, and you can say people can have.
I should drag it up?
Yeah.
This is the Forest Street Elementary School in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, about 50 miles from my hometown. Very nice, interesting small town. It's right on the river, the Black River. but the surrounding residential community is very nice hilly sites available. This is actually on the top of one of the hills. You'll notice the sloped roofs, which were kind of evolved to the residential community around the softer image. And the gymnasium is at the right. It goes down the hill, and then classrooms grouped around the kind of a courtyard here. Black River is an interesting town. They have the county courthouse there. The thing that always kind of struck me was this is cranberry and deer hunting country. So they had absolutely the largest gun shop within a 50-mile radius. This is the Concordia Music Hall, now called Rietow Center. Mr. Rietow was the sponsor of this. Again, we were interviewed, and I was a little apprehensive because I know that some larger firms, including Ellerby, have done previous work recently at the site. So we thought we made a good presentation. I made some sort of references to the Eastman School, my experience there, which may have helped. But I think the telling thing was, as I walked out of the interview, Dr. Paler, president at that time, I said, Dr. Paler, George Hoyer says hello to you. He said, well, how do you know George Hoyer? I said, well, I was recently at a seminar I'm a member of the Commission on Architecture at church, and I was at a seminar with George talking about church architecture. He patted me and said, Fred, you should have said that at the interview. Again, we could talk for 15 minutes on the acoustics concern, but basically just to review it gently, Dr. Mons was really in complete charge of the organ. He knew all the particulars. The only thing that I kept showing him what the configuration of the space was. He said, and all I need to know now is the height of the ceiling. So he insisted on 20 feet, and that's what we got. I think another unusual thing was we used a block not usual for this kind of building. It was a sort of porous concrete block which had certain acoustical qualities, and it seemed to work very well. We also, it's continental seating, which gets a lot of people, spaced further apart, but you do have to add extra exits on each side of the building to accommodate that. Next.
Fred?
Oh,
Fred?
again.
Pardon?
They just remodeled the auditorium and put a center aisle down. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
I got
they just
sad to hear
remodeled
that.
it this year.
We,
There's a center, the people had trouble getting through. There were like 25 seats across, I think.
yeah, you can't have more than 13 seats with access.
And now there's a center aisle down the middle.
Well, did they respaced all the seats then? No, they wouldn't have to.
I don't know that, but that's all I know, that I
Well,
haven't seen it.
We again, the influence of the music department versus the administration. Dr. Paler was anxious to get as many people in there, hoping to have lectures, maybe sonata conventions, unless an acoustical requirement doesn't match what you want for the organ. Dr. Mons, on the other hand, he wanted a lot of reverberation. So it's kind of I think it's kind of a trade, and that's true of most spaces that deal like this. Okay, this shows again part of the acoustical system. This sort of semi-balcony projection around here, it only projects about a foot there, but around toward the back, it gets to be about 5 feet, and it was thought that they could use that for projection, that they could even have musicians up there for voluntary kinds of things. I'm really happy to have Dr. Mons available. Between he and the board, they were very helpful and very cooperative, and I really developed a great relationship. I was asked by Dr. Mons to attend the groundbreaking ceremony, as I recall. So I came with a big roll of drawings and a thick book of specifications, and when it became my turn to speak, I said, you know, God in his Genesis account of Noah's Ark used only 86 words to describe 50 cubits, 150, 30 cubits, pitch inside and out. And I said, this is what it took to get this building rebuilt. I said, God didn't have to deal with a music factory. I also knew that it was a wonderful work. Next. This is another succeeding building at Concordia. We fortunately weren't interviewed for that, but I thought our work was satisfactory. And then again, as usual, the client comes with a program that doesn't begin to fit into the budget. They had a whole series of spaces, lounges, meeting rooms, game rooms, offices, whatever. And if you just put this all together on a flat plane, you never meet the budget. So our solution was to go to more flexible use of spaces. And the design, I think, see the interior design here. There are two crisscrossing balconies at the second and third level, so that at each four corners of the shaft that goes all through floors, which kept it more open and I think allowed for a little bit more flexibility. And then the light comes down through these four arrangements at each corner of the building. So there, but this project won several awards. Dr. Stegemuller was the president at that time, so he was president at the award ceremony here in Minneapolis. We were also kind of into our little more bold graphics at that time. I don't know. These things come and go. And fortunately, I think somehow they had engaged Dayton's contract division to do the furnishing, which was a great help to us. We were able to get that level of furniture into it. Next. This is the Minnetonka United Methodist in Minnetonka, Minnesota. It's a very interesting site, about 5 acres, partially in a residential community, but this direction down this way was open. Wrapping around the building on this side was a pretty well developed residential community. Incidentally, this is the first unit that was designed for expansion. First units were really in vogue at that time because there were many suburban congregations that were looking to add a church, and many of them sponsored by the downtown churches. Actually, I think I did the White Bear Lake, another one. I think I did 3 or 4 of these first unit buildings. You could almost say I was in my Methodist period. The congregation was very concerned that it not be too obtrusive. They didn't want any, I don't know how they did. They kept saying it should be a warm and inviting building. I don't know exactly what that meant, but we did do a completely wood structure. And that had some advantages to it. It just stained, and I think wouldn't intrude on the community too much, especially when we expanded it down this way. As we wrapped in, we could get 2-story elements here, and the sanctuary here, which could have a lower level too. This design sort of follows the crest of the hill. That'll show in the next plan. Next. This is, you can see the plan here. This is parking area. This is the first unit. This was intended to be the second, and this was intended to be the sanctuary eventually. It did fit nicely into the hill. I thought very nice. So much for the warm. Some years ago, I drove by and I saw this monstrous white building on the corner. We were at the time we were busy enough that I didn't really spend a lot of time following up on these projects, and again, somebody has a friend or whatever, there's always a reason. I recall that we got a addition to a first unit that Ed Sovic did, and Ed, of course, is the premier church architect in the country at that time. And I said, well, you really should continue with Ed on this job. I'm not interested. No. We had a boiler room problem on the last job. It just goes to show you how you get and don't get word. This is the worship area. Rather small, seats about 75, and this we sort of not catching my. This is a built-in bench along the wall which had lift-up seats for storage, and that could be used for expansion, for seating expansion. Next. This is a bank in Rochester, Minnesota. The bank wanted to have an impression of a very. You should tape this up.
I know.
You got a sling. Of a progressive bank in a more contemporary image. So the colors, the furnishings, even the globe and the chrome furnishings, mirrors, the glass ceiling. I think it got a little bit too glitzy. That's the truth. But the other interesting thing about this project, the head of the interview committee said, well, Mr. Bentz, why do you want to do this job? So I just used the Willie Sutton because that's where the money is. Next. This is one of my favorite buildings. It's right on the end of the mall, Minneapolis. Not a major building, it's about 12 stories, right across the street from the Hyatt Hotel. It's now in the process of demolition, sadly, and there's a kind of a story to that. Again, this job came to us through former associations. Two young guys who were really entrepreneurial decided they would be the developers. I had gotten to know them when we did work for Dayton Hudson Properties. And the contractor who they negotiated was Mortensen, then Mortensen Construction Company, now it's just Mortensen, of course. And I had two associations there, one with Mort Sr., who was the senior, and there was a Mort Jr. With Mort Sr., I had done a school in Fergus Falls and some work in Richfield High School, at a time when he had just gotten started, and we had a long relationship. And Mort Jr. came on just out of college. He was the estimator on the remodeling job at Powers Department Store. Some of you probably remember Powers. How's it going? I said, at any rate, it was a very good arrangement. We dealt with the adjoining Westminster Presbyterian Church. The agreement was that they would share parking space with the bank underground and have it. We worked with the architect at Westminster to make a good access to the lower level of Westminster. And that arrangement still persists. I think that will persist. There was an article in the paper a while back that talked about what was there. The church purchased the building and the land. They must have had a pretty healthy budget because the building cost $11 million way back when. I thought it was one of our better projects, one of the few that we had an opportunity to do an office-type building in the downtown area. Those are pretty hard to come by. Usually they seek out an international firm. Oh, we couldn't match the wonderful old stonework. We didn't intend to because it wouldn't have been appropriate for this thing. But the L-shaped arrangement, it's very hard to read here. There's an L-shaped arrangement here that sort of semi-encloses the court space in between. And there are times in the day, and you can kind of see here, I can't even kind of figure it out, when we get a reflection of the church in those dark glass walls. Mm-hmm. Next. Okay, this is 1666 Kaufman, a retirement project for retired university faculty and workers. Wonderful site, very open, as you know, next to the University Golf Course and next to the St. Paul campus. It was a very complete program. They had units ranging all the way from studio to 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, all available to underground parking. The image is one, it's almost Palladian, I think. I don't know if that was intentional, but it happened to me. Along this, there are 2 loggia hallways here entering the central building, which houses some of the main functions, a large dining hall and a library, etc. That's the library. Again, the university people insisted on a library. This is our response to Sir Walter Scott, not quite as big. Actually, the site, which is almost pastoral, I think, a great green space. I think this is not the contemporary response, but I think it was a good response to that particular client in this particular situation. Next. This is the dining space at 1666 Hall. And the other feature, you can just barely see it, they had a conservatory just outside, just outside. You could see through that out into the vast green space behind. 2 stories, so we don't have a chance to see. Next. This is Temple Israel, just off Hennepin in Minneapolis. Our challenge was to develop a back entrance off the parking lot, because no one was ever using a very classical entrance, classical columns and the traditional 5 pairs of doors. They only used the front entrance for special occasions and weddings and all that. It's a major problem to negotiate those steps for most of us. This is a very kind of modest, those tall columns are just precast concrete, cast in the plant and hauled out to the site and tipped up. We did add some offices, a lounge, kind of a riot space. We did add within the building about a 200-seat auditorium. At the time, we had a very limited budget. I think it was about $1.3 million for all that work. Now, again, this has currently been removed, and they're building an $11 million major facility on the backside. Hamlin Green are doing looks. It would be a very good firm. Again, I think the cost. We got so busy at times we didn't really pursue work as well. We didn't step back and meet with clients, say how you doing, and pat them on the back, that sort of thing. I like this design. I think lumber is a very simple design compared to quite a contrast to the project. Next. This is London Music Hall at Hamlin University. They were given $1 million by Lloyd and Mildred Sundin, who had been handicapped, had been students met at the university and lifelong sweethearts, I guess. I think they asked several architects, could you do this for $1 million? They described it for them, and some of them just kind of walked away. We thought we'd give it a whirl with the proviso that we would have good control of what got built and what didn't. So we met with Mildred Sundin. She came from California 3 or 4 times, and we sat down with her in meetings. We always had a university person there to kind of ride herd on us, I guess, so we wouldn't go too far astray. We had a very good relationship with Mildred. Acoustically, I took as a model is the Kilbourne Hall at the Eastern School of Music. And it's a standard shoebox form, the proportions of a shoebox. We know from long experiences, a good place to start. If you, to get fancier, that of course gets to be more money to it and more acoustical treatment. So the walls here are sort of alternating, not alternating, but at various locations we have soft panels, and various locations we have hard panels, and that seemed to work very well. I'll look at there was an entrance, I think it shows on the next drawing. But,
Right, and that's it?
next, the ceiling was shaped to, yeah, this shows, we actually, this is the main entrance here, but it's a half a riser, half a stairway up to the main entrance, and then you enter here and down, and then back up here. And there was we did provide for a handicap, we were getting this smart, on this side of the building, there was a corridor that wrapped around this building and connected to the existing classroom building. So we did have handicap entrance, which you have to enter here and then of course go back up. Nowadays, we probably have some handicap seating out there. Again, nobody was really too concerned, nobody was too concerned about it at that time. Lloyd kept, from the very start, kept saying he wanted a theater-type space that would accommodate light opera. He's a great fan of light opera, and he kept saying we don't have the room, the facilities, et cetera, to do this. And we finally won the battle. My partner, Milo Thompson, did that show on the previous one? I'm not sure. Back up. Yeah, see this sort of classical arts. Mm-hmm. Lloyd bought that as being adequate. The other thing, we did a complete color schedule. And we tried to do the whole thing and then present it rather than nitty-pick various kinds of schemes. Little did we know that Millard's favorite color is pink. So this, she did buy, this is kind of muted, but that's how this acoustically, I've had several musicians. The one who at Augsburg College, and I met him here one day, and he's a cellist, and he asked about it, and I said, you know, some people at that time thought it was the finest musical venue in this Minneapolis area. I don't know if that still holds true with all the new facilities that are being done. Again, contrast between, say, the vocal and the instrumental. George Chu, who was in charge of the vocal department, wanted it quite bright because young students don't have the same amount of projection and strength of voice that, say, a more mature person do. On the other hand, the head of the piano faculty didn't agree with that, so we tried to find a balance. This has always been a struggle in the movie. This is the exterior. And you can't see it here, but some of these stone details, brick patterns, that's the old building down there. We wanted something that would fit well into the site. I think this has done a pretty good job of that. Some architects would choose to make a statement and have something completely, a glass tower in there or something. Next. This is the Dayton's department store in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We did about 6 or 7 other stores, the smaller stores for Dayton's in Grand Forks, Bismarck, Sioux Falls, Across, and the Edina home store in Edina. We did these directly for the client. Our actual work with Dayton started way back in 1971 on when we joined as an associate of the Gruen office who did the original Southdale. And that continued on with a number of different associations over the years, even as they moved on to Marshall Fields and Macy's. So in my experience, we were there, they were a client of mine in the office for over 20 years. And I don't know you, John, but I think they continued with our office for another 10 or 15 years. They're still doing work for, I think, Marshall Fields and Macy's up till about 1908 or something, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. 2000. So I brought the notes along. We were given a chance to vary from what might be the typical sort of department store image, you know, break, not much going on. The next building, is the one store we did in Burnsville. And again, we tried to establish a little different identity in these various stores. It wasn't quite the same when we were following along with Gruen as the associate architect. We were responsible for the working drawing specifications for typically the tenant part of the building. I think Dayton's were really trying to establish a local connection. They had some concerns about dealing with the California office. Things like, they kind of upset one time when they found out that, I think it was at Rietow, that parts of the building were designed for California standards for earthquake protection. This again, engineers. So they got used to, and we took on a very fine engineering firm, Rashad, very good engineering firm, and very good electrical people. So I think they were much more comfortable with our engineers than they were with the Gruen engineers. It probably didn't help for the first job at Rietow. We were interviewed by the Gruen office and another office in California because they were at that time considering the other office. So we were interviewed by both those firms. Gruen finally came and asked us to join their team, which was good news for us because it developed such a long-term relationship. It probably didn't hurt again. The chief architect for Dayton's was my neighbor. You never know how next. Yeah, this is my final involvement, and John Akiba, who was the project manager, is with us today. Maybe John would like to add something to this. It's now Clancy's, isn't it? Macy's.
It's a Macy's.
Yes. This again was a major addition to the existing Rosedale. And interesting thing about that project too, I was chatting with John the other day. Again, they had their own interior design staff, then they added to that with so-called firms that had great interior design experience. Most of these offices came out of the old Raymond Loewy office, I think, because they're all in New York, et cetera, et cetera. But the firm at that time who was responsible for the overall design was called Slovenson, Smith, and Barisi. John reminded me of that. Smith was a very English, sort of a very gentleman kind of guy, and he'd come from England and early on and was practicing in New York. Never learned how to drive a car. But one day we were sitting at a luncheon, and I said to Ian, you know, your manner and your general sort of speech, everything remind me very much of the English actress Maggie Smith. He said, well, I'm her brother. Charlie, you wouldn't like to add anything to that? Okay, next. I've often asked the question, what house did you do, and what's your favorite house? And I said, I really had very little housing experience. My partner, Milo Thompson, loved to do houses. He did some very, very, very nice houses Lake Minneapolis, Aspen, Colorado, for one client. And they probably wanted the Lejeune residents at Lake Minneapolis, won a national award. I say he really was loved to do them. His only regret was that we never got to do a real high-rise in downtown Minneapolis. The only problem, and I know, John, we remember this, his initial sketches were usually so small, he had the doors at 2 feet wide, but we all thought, remember that? He could draw almost anything. At any rate, the only experience I had really was the design of housing for paraplegic veterans from World War II. The Veterans Administration had a program at that time, and it made a pretty good bow toward concerns for the handicapped. They were one level, wider doors, good bathroom arrangements, and an elevator to the basement. Beyond that, I've really only done one other house. This happens to be my parents' residence in Nakusa, 14 acres of pine trees. I recall the farmer that my dad purchased it from. Whenever he needed a tree, he went over and cut one down. And we had a long period of just cleaning it out. And matter of fact, it was maintained pretty park-like. As a matter of fact, Richard McCarthy here was my dad's favorite grass cutter.
Which is right there. Wave, wave.
This is
Wave, Rich.
the photo on the right is the two-person construction crew. They fell up, and it took us about 2 years. A lot of my vacations for a couple of years, and a lot of weekends getting back and forth to Minneapolis. The guy up on top of the wall is myself, and the other guy is my father, my 63-year-old father. I think that concludes it.
No, there's one more.
I tried to avoid this. This is at Mary Ann's insistence. You notice that first photograph of the bank, we were using T-squares. Now we've graduated to the parallel rule. We have some millennials here, don't we? Architects? I thought we had some. They probably don't know what a parallel rule is. At any rate, I tried to pinpoint that time. I think it was when he first moved into the, well, then it'd be Dane Tower, now back to the Rand Tower. We always try to pick office locations that were sort of promoting our image, if you will. We then moved into the Fauché Tower. And then after that, we moved, after I left the office, we moved into the Crystal Court building. Because during the downturn in the economy, they got a very good deal on taking over space now. I'm trying to look at my degree of bones, or I can't tell. I was going to ask somebody who I thought would be here, if you recall that. Is Darrell here? Yeah. Okay. Darrell, clue me in. When did you come to the office?
1967, 66.
So we were still in the old concourse building.
Yes, we were.
Okay. So, and Darrell was with us, I don't remember how long. I think you were still with us when I started the new office, weren't you?
Yes, that was the split of several offices were formed about that same time, 1972 to 3 or 4 something. It was
Well,
right after we did health sciences.
Well, I can't put the exact date, but I'm almost sure it was in the Rand Tower, which again was a nice building to office in. Rates were a little higher, but we felt it was really, at that time, younger people, the action was kind of right downtown. Now it's just the reverse. Everybody's moving into the warehouse district, because that's where all the action is. And restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. And they could get great open spaces, not have to finish them too much, and much more competitive rates than downtown. I think that concludes it. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to try to answer them. Oh, I have one other thing. As my excuse for not being on the board very much, I had at some point gotten to the point where and of course younger people like to do it all anyhow, which is just fine. I was trying to observe the what's the Boston architect? Did sort of massive stone buildings again.
Richardson.
He had his 3 rules for practicing architecture were 1, get the job, 2, get the job, 3, get the job. Any questions?
Yeah, as, what prompted you in your very early years to go into architecture, and were there architects who were influential to you?
That's a good question. There wasn't an awful lot. I was fairly young when I graduated. I was 16 when I graduated from high school. And my sister had been going to the Eastman School of Music, which that still is a very prestigious school. Somehow, I decided, well, I'd just tag along with her. And I had a scholarship. And there were 2 really wonderful years. But I made the mistake of starting the violin at about 9, and you should have started at 4 or 5. And but I enjoyed the experience. I never regretted going there. But toward the end of my second year there, I began just thinking about it. I felt I might, with a master's, I might be able to teach at the college level. But I'd always been interested in the building projects. When they built a new house around town or a new store or something, I was very much interested. And so when I got to searching around, looking at various catalogs, and I went down to Madison. There was an architect named William Keyser who had just started a practice. He on his office, he had these great, huge 8x10 drawings, Mozart's drawings with castles and the mountains and that sort of thing, which is what was basically going on. So he said, well, if you're thinking of going to school, I would recommend the University of Minnesota, because they have they've kind of rid themselves of the Mozart system. He said, I personally graduated from Illinois, but they're still on that system. And so he said, I've been up there and seeing what they're doing, and that's why I ended up at Minnesota. I would have gone to the University of Wisconsin, but they didn't have a school of architecture at that time. So I guess it just kind of happened. Didn't think about being an architect at 12 years old or anything like that.
You were involved with Harriet Bandshell too.
Pardon?
Did Harriet Bandshell also, right? Harriet
Yeah.
Bandshell?
I didn't show that job because that was more basically my partner's violence. I picked jobs here where I had more responsibility. And I actually, this original exhibit, we were limited to 20 boards at the state convention, so we only did 20 boards. It's a good thing, otherwise it's again, most architects, there's some jobs that you identify more. I really can't take much credit for that. On the other hand, some of these earlier jobs, Mankato, 3 or 4 of the earlier jobs, we weren't even together at that point. But we began to think about practicing as a team between Bob Rietow, Milo, and myself on projects like the housing building on Central Avenue. We had worked together there, and Bob and I had worked together, not Milo, because we were involved on the South High School. And so we'd had enough. Milo used to call it a 3-cornered stool.
What was the decision with South High School about? There aren't any windows in that building. Why was that?
You're very observant. That's not
Yeah,
our
I've taken
choice.
classes there.
No, they're not our choice. The Union Board was especially conscious of vandalism, and we talked about that at length, but we just couldn't get them to let us open up a little bit.
Yeah.
That was a
Claustrophobic.
school board choice.
Yeah.
Let's say our thanks.
Uh-huh.